Marcus Chun had seen his share of strange things working the night shift at Stellar Grounds Coffee on Luna Station. The 24-hour cafe sat right at the junction between the human residential quarter and the diplomatic district, making it a natural meeting point for all sorts of beings. But even by Luna Station standards, the creature that walked through his door at 0300 hours was unusual. The being stood nearly 8 feet tall, with scales that shifted from deep purple to midnight blue depending on the light. Its face was distinctly draconic, with intelligent amber eyes and small horns that curved back from its skull. What struck Marcus most was how carefully the creature moved, as if trying to make itself smaller, less noticeable. Its clothing was simple and dark, nothing that would draw attention. The cafe was empty except for Marcus and now his unusual customer. Most beings avoided the overnight hours, preferring the busier day shifts when they could blend into crowds. This one had clearly chosen this time deliberately. Marcus watched as the dragon-like being approached the counter with hesitant steps. Its eyes darted around the empty space, taking in every detail. When it spoke, its voice was deep but soft, with an accent Marcus couldn't place. "Excuse me, I was wondering if you might have something warm to drink." The politeness surprised Marcus. In his 3 years working Luna Station, he'd learned that most alien species fell into predictable patterns. The Zenthri were always demanding and impatient. The Corvallis spoke in formal, clipped sentences. The few Draknari he'd encountered were usually arrogant and dismissive of humans. But this one seemed almost shy. "Of course," Marcus said, wiping down the counter. "What would you like? We've got coffee, tea, hot chocolate, and a few alien blends." The creature's eyes lit up at the mention of coffee. "Coffee would be wonderful, if it's not too much trouble." "No trouble at all. How do you like it?" "I'm not sure. I've never had Earth coffee before." Marcus paused in reaching for a cup. A Draknari who had never tried coffee? That was unusual. Most diplomata personnel and traders had extensive experience with different species' foods and drinks. It was part of doing business across the galaxy. "Tell you what," Marcus said, "let me make you something special. On the house." The dragon's head tilted slightly. "On the house. Free. No charge." Those amber eyes widened. "Why would you do that?" Marcus shrugged as he began preparing a medium roast with a touch of cream and sugar. Nothing too strong for a first-timer, but flavorful enough to give a proper introduction to Earth coffee. "Because you look like you could use a good cup of coffee, and I like introducing people to new things." The honesty in Marcus's voice seemed to catch the creature off guard. It stood silently for a moment, watching as Marcus worked with practiced efficiency. The human's movements were smooth and confident, clearly someone who took pride in his craft. "My name is Drakthar," the being said finally. "Marcus," the human replied, not looking up from the brewing process. "Nice to meet you, Drakthar. You're Draknari, right?" "Yes." Drakthar's voice carried a note of caution. Marcus glanced up with a friendly smile. "First time on Luna Station?" "No, I've been here several times, but usually during busy hours. I prefer quieter times." "I get that. The night shift can be peaceful. Gives you time to think." Drakthar found himself relaxing slightly. There was something genuinely warm about this human. No hidden agenda, no careful diplomatic language, no signs of the fear or suspicion that Drakthar usually encountered. "Do you enjoy working nights?" Drakthar asked. Marcus finished preparing the coffee and slid it across the counter. "Actually, yeah. I'm studying xenobiology during the day, so night work fits my schedule. Plus, I meet interesting people." Drakthar carefully lifted the cup, inhaling the rich aroma. The scent was complex and inviting, unlike anything he'd experienced before. He took a small sip, and his eyes closed involuntarily as the flavors hit his palate. "This is exceptional," he said, genuine amazement in his voice. "Earth coffee is pretty special. We've been perfecting it for centuries." "Centuries?" Drakthar took another sip. "Your species dedicates that much time to perfecting a simple beverage?" Marcus laughed. "You'd be surprised what humans will spend centuries perfecting. Coffee, wine, music, art. We're kind of obsessive that way." "Obsessive," Drakthar repeated thoughtfully. That's an interesting way to put it. What about your people? What do Draknari spend centuries perfecting? The question was asked with such casual curiosity that Drakthar found himself answering before he thought about it. Governance, mostly. Strategy. The art of leadership. Makes sense. I've heard Draknari society is pretty complex. Drakthar nodded, then caught himself. How much should he reveal? But, looking at Marcus's open, friendly face, he found it hard to maintain his usual caution. Very complex. Sometimes exhaustingly so. Sounds stressful. It can be. Drakthar took another long sip of coffee. This helps, though. The warmth, the flavor. It's comforting. Marcus noticed the slight tension in Drakthar's shoulders, the way his eyes occasionally darted toward the windows that looked out onto the station's main corridor. Whatever had brought this being to his cafe at 3 in the morning, it wasn't a casual late-night craving for caffeine. You know, Marcus said, beginning to clean some equipment, I've always thought there's something honest about sharing a drink with someone. Especially coffee. It's one of those universal pleasures. Universal? Well, maybe not literally universal. But I've served coffee to dozens of different species, and most of them appreciate it. There's something about taking time to enjoy something simple and well-made that translates across cultures. Drakthar considered this as he continued drinking. The human was right in a way. This moment, sitting in a quiet cafe with a warm drink, felt somehow separate from all the complications of his usual existence. Do you know much about Draknari culture? Drakthar asked. Some basic stuff. I know you're one of the older space-faring civilizations. Very organized, very hierarchical. Honor-based society. Beyond that, not much detail. That's more than most humans know. Like I said, I study xenobiology. Part of that is understanding different cultural approaches to life and society. Drakthar finished his coffee and set the cup down gently. This has been pleasant. Thank you, Marcus. Anytime. You're welcome back whenever you want. As Drakthar turned to leave, Marcus called after him. Hey, Drakthar. If you ever want to try other Earth beverages, I've got access to some great tea varieties. And hot chocolate is pretty amazing too. The dragon stopped and looked back. You would be willing to share those as well. Of course. Like I said, I enjoy introducing people to new things. Something shifted in Drakthar's expression. For just a moment, his carefully maintained composure cracked, revealing something that might have been loneliness or gratitude, or simple surprise at unexpected kindness. I would like that very much. After Drakthar left, Marcus continued his cleaning routine, but his thoughts kept returning to his unusual customer. There had been something about the Draknari that didn't quite fit the usual patterns. The careful way he moved, the surprise at simple kindness, the hints of stress and isolation. Marcus had learned to read people during his years of night shift work. The late hours attracted beings who were avoiding something, crowds, attention, responsibilities. Drakthar had definitely been avoiding something, but what? It didn't really matter, Marcus decided. Everyone deserved a place to find a moment of peace, and if his coffee shop could provide that, he was happy to help. He'd learned long ago that sometimes the most profound connections happened in the simplest moments. 3 hours later, as Marcus prepared to close for the shift change, he found himself hoping Drakthar would return. There had been something genuine about the dragon's appreciation for the coffee, and Marcus had enjoyed their brief conversation. In a galaxy full of diplomatic protocols and cultural barriers, honest interaction was rare and valuable. He made a mental note to stock some of the premium Earth blends tomorrow night, just in case. 3 nights passed before Drakthar returned to Stellar Grounds. Marcus was restocking the pastry display when the familiar tall figure appeared in the doorway, moving with the same careful deliberation as before. Marcus, Drakthar said, approaching the counter. I was hoping you might be working tonight. Good to see you again, Marcus replied with genuine warmth. Coffee. Actually, you mentioned tea last time. Marcus brightened. I did. I've got some Earl Grey that's pretty popular with off-worlders. Or if you want something more unusual, there's a jasmine green tea that's supposed to be very calming. Calming sounds appropriate. As Marcus prepared the tea, he noticed that Drakthar seemed more relaxed than during his first visit, but there was still that underlying tension. The dragon's eyes continued their habit of scanning the empty cafe and the corridor beyond. "Rough day?" Marcus asked casually. Drakthar's laugh held no humor. "Rough decade, more accurately. Want to talk about it? Sometimes it helps to tell a stranger. I'm not sure you would understand. Human and Draknari society are quite different." Marcus finished steeping the tea and slid the cup across the counter. "Try me. I might surprise you." Drakthar inhaled the jasmine scent and took a careful sip. The tea was exactly as promised, soothing and aromatic with a subtle complexity that revealed itself gradually. "This is remarkable," he said. "Your species has such an intuitive understanding of flavor. We've had a lot of practice. So what's weighing on your mind?" For a long moment, Drakthar stared into his tea. When he spoke, his voice was quiet and measured. "Do you know anything about Draknari leadership structures?" "A little. Hereditary nobility, right? Very traditional. Extremely traditional. So traditional that change of any kind is viewed with suspicion. Innovation is seen as dangerous. New ideas are considered threats to stability." Marcus nodded encouragingly. "Sounds frustrating for someone who might see room for improvement." "Exactly." Drakthar looked up, surprise flickering across his features. "Most beings don't grasp that immediately. Well, I come from species that's built on change and innovation, sometimes to a fault. I can imagine how stifling the opposite extreme would be. It's more than stifling. It's—" Drakthar searched for the right word. "Suffocating. Every decision must be weighed against centuries of precedent. Every action must be justified through historical example. There's no room for adaptation, no allowance for new circumstances. But the galaxy is changing constantly. New species making contact, new technologies, new challenges. How can any society function without adapting?" "That," Drakthar said, "is exactly the question I've been asking for years. And the answer I keep getting is that adaptation is weakness, that true strength comes from unchanging principles." Marcus refilled Drakthar's teacup. "That seems like a recipe for stagnation. Or collapse." Drakthar's voice carried a weight that suggested this wasn't theoretical concern. When societies refuse to bend, they eventually break. "Is that what you're trying to prevent?" Drakthar went very still. For a moment, Marcus worried he'd pushed too far, asked too personal a question. But then the dragon's shoulders sagged slightly. "I'm trying. But change from within is extraordinarily difficult when questioning tradition is considered treason." Treason seems like a strong word. Not strong enough, unfortunately. In Draknari society, challenging the established order isn't just political opposition. It's seen as an attack on the fundamental nature of our civilization. Marcus absorbed this, understanding now why Drakthar sought out quiet places like his cafe. The dragon wasn't just avoiding crowds. He was avoiding scrutiny. "That must be incredibly lonely," Marcus said. The simple observation hit harder than any complex analysis might have. Drakthar's careful composure cracked slightly. "Yes," he admitted, "it is." They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes. The only sounds the quiet hum of the station's ventilation system and the occasional footstep in the corridor outside. Marcus had learned that sometimes the most important conversations happened in these quiet spaces between words. "Can I ask you something?" Drakthar said eventually. "Of course. How does your species handle disagreement? When humans have fundamentally different ideas about how society should function?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "Honestly, not always well. We've had plenty of conflicts over different visions of how to live. But we've also developed systems for managing disagreement without destroying everything, such as democratic processes mostly, the idea that competing ideas should be tested through debate and voting rather than violence. It's not perfect, but it allows for change without revolution. And this works? Sometimes. Other times it gets messy and chaotic. But the mess is usually temporary, and the chaos often leads to better solutions than anyone could have designed alone. Drakthar shook his head in amazement. Your species actually embraces chaos as a path to improvement? Not chaos exactly, but we've learned that controlled conflict between ideas tends to produce better results than enforced uniformity. That's completely contrary to everything I was taught about effective governance. Maybe that's because your people and my people face different challenges. Or maybe there are multiple valid approaches to the same problems. Drakthar stared at Marcus with something approaching awe. You just casually suggested that two completely different governmental philosophies could both be valid. Why not? The universe is a big place. Probably room for lots of different approaches. Most Draknari would consider that statement either naive or heretical. Marcus shrugged. Most humans would probably consider your people's dedication to tradition either admirable or stifling, depending on their perspective. Doesn't mean either view is completely right or wrong. You have a remarkable capacity for holding contradictory ideas simultaneously. It's one of our better survival traits. Helps us adapt to new situations. Drakthar finished his tea and sat back, looking thoughtful. I'm beginning to understand why humans have been so successful at interspecies relations. Your flexibility must be invaluable in negotiations. Sometimes, other times it makes us seem unreliable to species that prefer clear, unchanging positions. Like the Draknari. I wasn't going to say it, but yes. You may have a point about the value of different approaches, Drakthar said slowly. I've been so focused on changing my own people that I hadn't considered whether other species might offer alternative models. There's probably wisdom to be found in all sorts of places, if you know how to look for it. Wisdom in a coffee shop at 3 in the morning? Marcus grinned. Some of the best wisdom comes from unexpected places. Besides, caffeine has been fueling important conversations for centuries. And tea? Tea's been doing it for even longer. Drakthar stood to leave, but hesitated at the door. Marcus, may I ask you a hypothetical question? Sure. If someone wanted to introduce gradual change to a very traditional society, hypothetically, what would be the most effective approach? Marcus thought for a moment. Hypothetically, I'd probably start by demonstrating that the changes could strengthen rather than weaken the society's core values. Show that adaptation can preserve what's important while improving what isn't working. And if the society's leaders were resistant to any change whatsoever, then I'd probably look for ways to implement small improvements that were hard to argue with. Changes that were so obviously beneficial that opposing them would seem unreasonable, such as better communication systems, improved trade relations, enhanced security. Things that make everyone's life better without threatening anyone's authority. Drakthar nodded slowly. That's actually quite insightful. Plus, hypothetically speaking, having allies who understand different approaches to the same problems probably wouldn't hurt. Allies, Drakthar repeated. Yes, that would be valuable. Well, hypothetically, if this person ever needed someone to bounce ideas off of, I'll be here most nights. Coffee's always fresh. Thank you, Marcus, for the tea and for the conversation. Anytime, Drakthar. Anytime. As the dragon left, Marcus found himself hoping their hypothetical conversation might lead to something more concrete. There had been something in Drakthar's voice that suggested these weren't idle, philosophical questions. Whatever the dragon was planning, Marcus suspected it was important, not just for Drakthar personally, but potentially for the entire galaxy's future. 2 weeks had passed since their last conversation, and Marcus was beginning to worry about Drakthar. The dragon had become something of a regular fixture during the quiet hours, usually arriving between 0200 and 0400 when the station was at its most peaceful. His absence felt wrong somehow. When Drakthar finally appeared, Marcus immediately noticed the difference. The dragon moved with more tension than usual, his amber eyes constantly scanning the corridor behind him. Dark circles under his eyes suggested he hadn't been sleeping well. The usual? Marcus asked, already reaching for the jasmine tea. Actually, could I have that coffee again? I think I need something stronger tonight. Marcus prepared a fresh cup, adding an extra shot for good measure. As he worked, he noticed Drakthar's claws tapping nervously against the counter, a habit he'd never displayed before. Rough couple of weeks? You could say that. Drakthar accepted the coffee gratefully. Tell me, Marcus, what do you know about the Galactic Council? The basics. It's where the major species meet to discuss interstellar issues. Trade agreements, territorial disputes, that kind of thing. Why? They're meeting next month to vote on the Centauri expansion protocols. Very important legislation that would regulate how species can establish colonies in contested systems. Marcus nodded. He'd heard something about this on the station news feeds. Sounds like it could affect a lot of people. Millions of people across dozens of species. The way the vote goes could determine whether expansion happens through cooperation or conflict. And I'm guessing the Draknari have strong opinions about which direction things should go. Drakthar's laugh was bitter. The Draknari leadership wants to vote for the most restrictive interpretation possible. Complete territorial sovereignty, absolute respect for existing claims, no provisions for joint colonization or shared resources. That doesn't sound very flexible. It's not. It's also guaranteed to create conflicts with at least 6 other major species who need access to those systems for their growing populations. Marcus poured himself a cup of coffee and joined Drakthar at one of the small tables near the window. But if the Draknari leadership has already decided their position, what's the problem? The problem is that I'm the one who has to cast their vote. Marcus nearly choked on his coffee. You're what? I'm the official Draknari representative to the Galactic Council. You're a diplomat? More than that, actually. Drakthar stared out the window at the stars beyond Luna Station. I'm the crown prince of the Draknari Empire. For a moment, Marcus couldn't process what he'd just heard. The quiet, thoughtful dragon who'd been visiting his coffee shop was royalty. Not just any royalty, the heir to one of the galaxy's most powerful civilizations. You're kidding, Marcus said finally. I wish I were. But you? You seem so normal. I was going to say approachable. Most royalty I've encountered has been pretty formal. Most royalty doesn't sneak out to coffee shops at 3 in the morning to avoid their security details. That explained the nervous glances toward the corridor and the careful movements. Drakthar wasn't just seeking privacy. He was actively evading protection. How long have you been doing this? Coming here, About 6 months, on and off. This place has become something of a refuge for me. And you never thought to mention that you're, space royalty? Drakthar's expression was almost pleading. Would you have treated me the same way if you'd known? Marcus considered this honestly. Probably not. I would have been more formal, more careful about what I said. Exactly. For the first time in years, someone was talking to me like I was just another person. Not a prince, not a future emperor, not a political symbol. Just Drakthar who enjoys good coffee and thoughtful conversation. I get it. But this changes things, doesn't it? This vote you're talking about. You have real power to influence it. That's the problem. I have the power, but using it the way I think is right could destroy everything my family has built. Marcus leaned back in his chair, trying to process the implications. Walk me through it. What exactly are you considering? The smart vote, the one that prevents future conflicts, would be to support the cooperative framework. Shared colonization rights, joint resource development, mandatory arbitration for disputes. It's not perfect, but it gives everyone a path forward without war. Sounds reasonable. It also directly contradicts 3 centuries of Draknari foreign policy and goes against explicit orders from my father, the current emperor. Marcus was beginning to understand the weight Drakthar had been carrying. And if you vote against those orders, best case scenario, I'm stripped of my title and exiled. Worst case, my actions are seen as treason and I'm executed. What about middle ground scenarios? There aren't any. Draknari politics doesn't allow for middle ground on issues this fundamental. Marcus stared into his coffee, thinking, can I ask you something? Of course. What do you think will happen if you follow your father's orders and vote for the restrictive framework? Drakthar closed his eyes. Maybe not immediately, but within 5 years, certainly within 10. The Zenthari need those systems to resettle refugees from their home cluster. The Corvallis require the mineral resources for their manufacturing economy. The hegemony sees expansion as essential to their cultural survival. And if those species can't get what they need through legal channels, they'll take it by force. And once the fighting starts, it'll spread. Too many old grudges, too many territorial disputes that have been kept in check by the current balance of power. How many casualties are we talking about? Conservative estimates? Hundreds of millions dead, entire star systems devastated, economic collapse across multiple sectors. Drakthar opened his eyes and looked directly at Marcus. And that's if the conflict stays conventional and doesn't escalate to full-scale species warfare. Marcus felt the weight of galactic politics settling on his shoulders. Here in his quiet coffee shop, he was being told about decisions that could affect the lives of billions of beings across the galaxy. Okay, so voting with your father leads to war. Voting against him saves lives, but destroys your future and possibly your family's position. Is there a third option? Such as, I don't know, you're the one with the political training. Isn't there some way to achieve the good outcome without triggering the bad consequences? Drakthar shook his head. I've been thinking about this for months. There's no way to cast a vote that satisfies both the practical necessities and Draknari tradition. What if you don't cast a vote at all? Abstaining is considered even worse than voting incorrectly. It implies that the Draknari Empire is indecisive or weak. Marcus stood and walked to the window, looking out at the vast expanse of space beyond the station. Somewhere out there, millions of beings were going about their lives, unaware that their futures might depend on the decision of one conflicted prince sitting in a coffee shop. Drakthar, can I ask you a really direct question? Go ahead. What kind of emperor do you want to be? What do you mean, if you do inherit the throne someday? What kind of ruler do you want to be remembered as? Someone who preserved tradition at any cost, or someone who made the hard choices necessary to protect his people? That's assuming I live long enough to inherit anything. Humor me. What kind of emperor? Drakthar was quiet for a long moment. I want to be remembered as someone who made the Draknari Empire stronger, not just more rigid. Someone who understood that true strength comes from adapting to new challenges while maintaining core values. And what are the core values of the Draknari? Honor, duty, protection of our people and our allies. Protection of your people. That includes protecting them from unnecessary wars, doesn't it? Yes, but nothing. Marcus turned back to face Drakthar. If your core value is protecting your people, and voting against the cooperative framework leads to war that kills millions of Draknari, then isn't supporting cooperation the more traditional choice? Drakthar stared at him. That's actually a brilliant reframing. It's not reframing. It's just looking at the situation from a different angle. You're not abandoning Draknari values. You're upholding the most important one. My father won't see it that way. Then, maybe it's time for your father to learn something about the galaxy his son has been exploring while drinking coffee with humans at 3 in the morning. For the first time since he'd arrived that night, Drakthar smiled. You know, Marcus, for a coffee shop worker, you're remarkably wise. For space royalty, you're remarkably normal. Thank you. For everything. These conversations have meant more to me than you could know. They've meant a lot to me, too. And Drakthar, whatever you decide, I hope it's a decision you can live with. So do I, my friend. So do I. The Galactic Council chambers on Station Prime were unlike anything Marcus had ever imagined he might see. The massive curved hall could hold representatives from over 100 different species, with atmospheric controls and environmental adjustments for beings that breathed everything from oxygen to methane to crystallized energy. He wasn't supposed to be there, of course. Coffee shop workers didn't typically receive invitations to witness the most important interstellar political events of the decade. But 3 days after their conversation about the Centauri vote, Drakthar had sent him a message through encrypted channels. Would you like to see democracy in action? I've arranged gallery access for tomorrow's vote. Your perspective might be valuable. The message had included transport arrangements, security clearances, and a brief note. Whatever happens, I want you to know that our conversations helped clarify my thinking. Thank you. Now Marcus sat in the public observation gallery, surrounded by diplomats, journalists, and other beings with much more legitimate reasons to be present. He felt completely out of place, but also strangely honored. Below him, The greatest political theater in the galaxy was about to unfold. The chamber filled slowly as representatives took their designated positions. Marcus spotted Drakthar immediately. The Dragon Prince wore formal ceremonial robes that made him look much more imposing than the casual figure who visited the coffee shop. But even at this distance, Marcus could see the tension in his posture. Chancellor Vextai of the Zenthari Coalition called the session to order, her crystalline voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics. The preliminary procedures seemed to stretch forever. Recognition of delegations, procedural votes, formal presentations of the proposed legislation. Marcus found himself studying the other representatives, trying to guess how they might vote. The Corvallis delegation huddled together in intense whispered discussion. The Human Confederation's ambassador kept checking data tablets, probably running last-minute calculations on potential outcomes. The massive hegemony representative sat perfectly still, giving no indication of their intentions. When Chancellor Vextai finally called for formal debate on the Centauri expansion protocols, the chamber seemed to hold its collective breath. Ambassador Kethran of the Corvallis spoke first, arguing passionately for the cooperative framework. His species needed the industrial resources of the Centauri systems to support their growing population. Without access to those materials, the Corvallis faced economic collapse within a generation. The hegemony representative followed, speaking in the booming harmonic tones of their species. Their argument focused on cultural preservation. The hegemony believed that controlled expansion was essential for maintaining the diverse civilizations that made the galaxy rich and vibrant. Several smaller species added their voices, most supporting some version of the cooperative framework. The mathematics were compelling. Shared colonization simply made more sense than the inevitable conflicts that would arise from territorial exclusivity. Then, it was time for the major powers to declare their positions. The Human Confederation announced their support for cooperation, as expected. Humans had built their interstellar presence on trade relationships and cultural exchange. They naturally favored frameworks that promoted interaction over isolation. The Zenthari Coalition followed suit, with Chancellor Vextai herself delivering a stirring address about the necessity of mutual aid in an increasingly complex galaxy. That left the Draknari Empire, whose vote would likely determine the outcome. If they supported cooperation, the framework would pass easily. If they opposed it, the vote would be much closer, and several smaller species might switch sides to avoid offending the galaxy's oldest spacefaring civilization. Marcus watched Drakthar rise from his seat and approach the central speaking platform. The chamber fell completely silent. Everyone understood the significance of this moment. Honored delegates, Drakthar began, his voice steady despite the enormous pressure he faced. The Draknari Empire has always valued tradition, stability, and the preservation of established order. Marcus felt his heart sink. It sounded like Drakthar was about to deliver exactly the speech his father had demanded. For 3,000 years, our civilization has endured because we understand the importance of honoring our commitments and respecting established boundaries. These principles have served us well, and they have contributed to the general peace that has characterized interstellar relations for the past several centuries. The chamber remained silent, but Marcus could sense the growing disappointment among the delegates who had hoped for Draknari support. However, Drakthar continued, and Marcus sat up straighter. The Draknari Empire also values wisdom, foresight, and, above all, the protection of our people and our allies. Now there were subtle shifts in posture throughout the chamber. Drakthar was departing from the expected script. We have studied the demographic projections for the Centauri systems. We have analyzed the resource requirements of our fellow civilizations. We have modeled the likely consequences of various policy choices. Drakthar paused, and in that moment, Marcus could see the weight of centuries pressing down on the young prince's shoulders. The evidence is clear. Restrictive territorial policies will not preserve peace, they will guarantee conflict. Species that cannot meet their basic needs through legal channels will inevitably seek other means. The The result will be exactly the kind of chaos and destruction that our traditional policies are meant to prevent. A low murmur ran through the chamber. This was definitely not the speech anyone had expected from the Draknari representative. Therefore, the Draknari Empire casts its vote in favor of the cooperative Centauri framework. We do so not in abandonment of our traditions, but in service to our highest values. We choose cooperation because we believe it is the path most likely to preserve the peace and prosperity that all our peoples deserve. The silence that followed was absolute and electric. Then, Chancellor Vextai's voice rang out clearly. The vote is recorded. The cooperative Centauri framework passes by a margin of 67 to 31. The chamber erupted in a mix of cheers, applause, and heated discussions. Marcus watched as delegates from dozens of species converged on Drakthar, some offering congratulations, others clearly expressing surprise or concern. But what struck Marcus most was the expression on Drakthar's face. Despite the political earthquake he had just triggered, despite the certain consequences he would face from his own government, the Dragon Prince looked relieved. For the first time since Marcus had known him, Drakthar looked like he was completely at peace with himself. The remainder of the session dealt with implementation details and procedural matters, but Marcus barely heard any of it. His mind was spinning with the implications of what he'd just witnessed. A single individual had potentially changed the trajectory of galactic civilization, and he had done so based partly on conversations held over coffee in a quiet shop on Luna Station. As the session concluded and delegates began filing out, Marcus made his way toward the diplomatic areas, hoping to catch Drakthar before security protocols took over. He found the prince surrounded by a small crowd of reporters and minor diplomats, handling their questions with the practiced skill of someone trained in statecraft. When Drakthar spotted Marcus approaching, he politely excused himself from the crowd and walked over. "You came," Drakthar said, genuine pleasure in his voice. "Thank you for inviting me." That was incredible. It was terrifying, Drakthar admitted, but also liberating. "Any word from home yet?" "My father has demanded an immediate explanation. I'll be returning to the Draknari homeworld tomorrow to face the consequences." "Are you worried?" Drakthar considered the question. "Strangely, no. For the first time in my life, I made a decision based on what I believed was right rather than what was expected. Whatever happens next, I can live with that. For what it's worth, I think you did the right thing. Your opinion is worth a great deal to me, Marcus. More than you know." A stern-looking Draknari in military dress approached them. "Your Highness, we need to depart for the transport." Drakthar nodded, then turned back to Marcus. "I don't know what the future holds. My actions today may have ended my political career before it truly began. But if they did, at least I'll have memories of good coffee and better conversation to sustain me. Coffee will be waiting whenever you need it," Marcus said. "And so will the conversation. Thank you, my friend, for everything." As Marcus watched Drakthar disappear into the crowd of security personnel and diplomatic staff, he felt a profound sense of privilege. He had been witness to a moment when a single person chose principle over comfort, when someone with everything to lose decided that some things were more important than personal security. The galaxy was going to be different because of what had happened in this chamber today, and it had started with late-night conversations over coffee between a prince and a barista who had simply treated each other as equals. Walking back through the corridors of Station Prime toward the transport that would take him back to Luna Station, Marcus reflected on the strange paths that led to history-making moments. Sometimes the most important conversations happened in the most unlikely places. Sometimes the fate of civilizations was decided not in grand councils or military headquarters, but in quiet coffee shops where two people could speak honestly about what mattered most. He was already looking forward to returning to his simple night shift, serving coffee to insomniacs and travelers and anyone else who needed a warm drink and a friendly conversation. But he would never again underestimate the power of those small, human moments of connection. 6 months passed without any word from Drakthar. Marcus had followed the news coverage of the aftermath religiously, but official reports from the Draknari Empire were sparse and carefully neutral. The prince had returned home to consultations with imperial leadership. There had been no announcements of punishment, but also no public appearances or statements. Marcus tried to maintain his normal routine, but the night shift at Stellar Grounds felt different somehow. He found himself looking toward the door during those quiet early morning hours, hoping to see a familiar tall figure with purple-scaled features. Other customers came and went, diplomats grabbing quick caffeine fixes between meetings, shift workers from the docking bays, the occasional trader looking for conversation after a long journey through hyperspace. But none of them filled the space that Drakthar had occupied in Marcus's life. Their conversations had become something Marcus looked forward to, a bright spot in the solitary hours of night work. More than that, they had given Marcus a sense that his small role in the vast machinery of galactic civilization actually mattered. Then, on a quiet Tuesday at 0245 hours, the door chimed and a figure in a dark hooded cloak stepped into the cafe. Marcus's heart jumped before his rational mind could process what he was seeing. The newcomer was the right height and moved with familiar careful grace, but something was different. Where Drakthar had always carried himself with barely concealed tension, this figure seemed more relaxed, more confident. The figure approached the counter and pushed back the hood, revealing Drakthar's unmistakable draconic features. But the dragon prince Marcus remembered was gone, replaced by someone who carried himself with the unmistakable bearing of authority. "Hello, Marcus," Drakthar said, and even his voice was different, deeper, more resonant, with the kind of presence that made people instinctively pay attention. Drakthar Marcus breathed. "You're alive." "Very much so. And I believe I owe you an explanation." "You don't owe me anything." "Coffee, please. Something special. We're celebrating tonight." Marcus began preparing a complex blend he'd been working on during the quiet months, something that combined Earth coffee with compatible aromatic compound from 3 other worlds. His hands moved automatically while his mind raced with questions. "Celebrating? My father died 3 weeks ago. Natural causes. He was quite old, even by Draknari standards. I am now Emperor of the Draknari." Marcus nearly dropped the coffee he was preparing. "You're the Emperor?" "I am. And the first act of my reign was to formally endorse the Cooperative Centauri framework and announce a comprehensive review of Draknari foreign policy." "How did your people react to that?" Drakthar's laugh was rich and genuine. "Better than I expected. Actually, it turns out that my vote 6 months ago sparked a great deal of debate within the Empire. Many of our younger leaders have been having similar thoughts about the need for adaptation." Marcus slid the coffee across the counter. "So you weren't executed for treason?" "Not even close. My father was disappointed, certainly, but he was also pragmatic enough to recognize that the old ways weren't sustainable. We spent months discussing the changes that were coming whether we embraced them or not. And now the Draknari Empire is committed to a new path. We're already negotiating joint colonization agreements with the Zenthari and establishing cultural exchange programs with a dozen smaller species." Marcus shook his head in amazement. "The galaxy really is going to be different. Very different. And much better, I believe." Drakthar sipped his coffee and smiled. "This is extraordinary, by the way. How many worlds did you blend?" 4, actually. I've been experimenting while you were gone. You've improved considerably. This is worthy of an imperial table. Speaking of which, shouldn't you be surrounded by guards and advisors and imperial things? Probably. But one of the advantages of being emperor is that people can't actually stop me from going where I want to go. My security detail is currently having nervous breakdowns in the corridor outside, but they'll cope." Marcus looked toward the window, and, sure enough, he could see several figures in formal Draknari military dress standing at strategic positions. "They let you come alone?" "They didn't let me do anything. I informed them that I was visiting an old friend, and that anyone who tried to prevent it would find themselves assigned to guard duty on the outer rim for the next decade. Remind me never to get on your bad side." "Marcus, you couldn't be on my bad side if you tried." You're the reason I found the courage to make the right choice 6 months ago. I didn't do anything except listen and ask questions. Exactly. You treated me like a person instead of a political symbol. You asked me what kind of leader I wanted to be instead of what kind of leader I was expected to be. That made all the difference. Marcus felt a flush of pride, but also a strange sense of loss. The informal, troubled prince who had sought refuge in his coffee shop was gone, replaced by someone who could reshape civilizations with a word. I guess our conversations are going to be different now, Marcus said. Why? Because you're the emperor of the galaxy's oldest spacefaring civilization, and I'm a night shift coffee shop worker. Drakthar's expression became serious. Marcus, do you remember what you told me about the value of different perspectives? Vaguely. You said that wisdom could be found in all sorts of places if you knew how to look for it. You said some of the best wisdom came from unexpected places. I remember. Well, I've spent the last 6 months surrounded by advisors, generals, economists, and diplomats, all brilliant individuals with decades of experience in their fields. But do you know what none of them could give me? What? The perspective of someone who sees the galaxy from outside the power structures. Someone who understands what ordinary beings actually want from their governments. Someone who judges ideas based on their merit rather than their political implications. Marcus began to understand where this was leading. Drakthar, Emperor Drakthar actually, but I'm hoping you'll still call me by my name when we're having these conversations. These conversations? Marcus, how would you like a job? What kind of job? Special advisor to the Emperor on interspecies relations and social policy. The position comes with diplomatic immunity, access to the Imperial Palace, and the best coffee budget in the galaxy. Marcus stared at him. You're kidding. I'm completely serious. The Draknari Empire is about to undergo the most significant transformation in our history. I need someone I trust to help me understand how our changes will affect ordinary beings across the galaxy. But I don't know anything about governing an empire. You know about treating people with respect regardless of their species or background. You know about listening to what people actually need instead of what you think they should want. You know about finding common ground between very different perspectives. That's just being decent to people. Exactly. That's exactly what I need. Someone who understands that effective leadership starts with basic decency. Marcus sat down heavily on one of the stools behind the counter. This is insane. This is an opportunity to help shape the future of galactic civilization. Think about it. We could create frameworks for cooperation that make what happened with the Centauri protocols look like small-scale negotiation. And if I say no, then I'll keep coming here at 3 in the morning for coffee and conversation, and you'll have to put up with my security detail cluttering up your cafe. Marcus looked around the small space that had been his world for the past 3 years. It was a good life, quiet and predictable with its own satisfactions. But the chance to actually make a difference on a galactic scale? What would I tell people? Yesterday, I was serving coffee. Today, I'm advising the Draknari Emperor. You tell them the truth, that good ideas can come from anywhere, and the most important qualifications for leadership are wisdom and integrity, not formal credentials. That's very human thinking. I've learned a lot from humans over the past few months. Your species' approach to innovation and adaptation has much to offer the galaxy. Marcus stood and walked to the window, looking out at the stars. Somewhere out there, billions of beings were living their lives, facing challenges that could benefit from the kind of practical wisdom that came from actually listening to what people needed. If I take this job, does that mean no more quiet conversations in coffee shops? It means we'll have those conversations in a lot more interesting places. Imperial ships, diplomatic receptions, colony worlds where we're helping establish new settlements. The galaxy is full of coffee shops, Marcus, and most of them serve beverages that would benefit from your expertise. Marcus turned back to face Drakthar, Emperor Drakthar, and saw in his amber eyes the same genuine warmth that had characterized their first meeting months ago. Power hadn't changed the essential person, just given him the tools to act on his convictions. When would I start? Tomorrow, if you're willing. We're hosting a conference on interspecies trade relations next week, and I like your perspective on the proposed agreements. I don't know anything about trade relations. You know about what makes interactions between different kinds of beings successful. That's exactly what trade relations are, just on a larger scale. Marcus made his decision. All right, but I have one condition. Name it. I want to keep working one night shift a week here at the coffee shop. Some conversations are too important to have in palaces and conference rooms. Done. In fact, I think the Imperial schedule can accommodate regular visits to Luna Station. Considered a diplomatic necessity. In that case, Your Imperial Majesty, you have yourself a new advisor. Just Drakthar when we're here, remember? Just Drakthar when we're here, Marcus agreed. As they finished their coffee and prepared to leave, Drakthar for his ship, Marcus for a conversation with his manager about giving notice, Marcus reflected on the strange path that had led him to this moment. A simple act of kindness, offering free coffee to a lonely customer, had somehow evolved into a chance to help guide the development of galactic civilization. It was, he thought, a perfect example of humanity's greatest strength, the ability to build meaningful connections across any barrier, whether cultural, political, or species-based. Sometimes the most profound changes began with the smallest gestures of understanding. The future was going to be interesting.